Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. I would like to say that these readings today are part of my medical ethics class that I think y'all would find interesting. The Quinlan Case, a Jewish Perspective. Karen Ann Quinlan's tragic life and protracted death have not been in vain. Unconscious though she may be, she has served as the fulcrum of recurring moral dilemma. Euthanasia, usually passive but at times active, has been and continues to be practiced with a high degree of frequency. Albert clandestinely, the physicians of St. Clare's Hospital are to be commended for not opting for the path of least resistance, and for their tenacity in scrupulously discharging the moral and professional duties with which they are charged. The controversy surrounding the care of Karen Quinlan has called attention to and sharpened the question which we posed over and over again. Who is the arbiter of life and death, man or God? The Quinlan case, particularly as tried in the press, presented three critical issues. The first, whether or not Karen should be pronounced dead, was a specious question from the start. It quickly became evident that Karen Quinlan is alive, even according to the most liberal definitions of death. The second question was that of vicarious consent. Many parents authorize withdrawal of treatment. From the legal perspective, proxy consent remains a clouded area from the perspective of Jewish law. Parents have no standing whatsoever in this matter. The obligations which exist with regard to treatment of the sick are autonomous in nature and not at all contingent upon the desire of parents, or for that matter, of the patient. Judge Muir's statement, the only case where a parent has standing to pursue constitutional right on behalf of an infant are those involving continuing lifestyles, is quite consistent with Jewish ethics. The third question is by far the most crucial. Does anyone have the right to choose death over life? Since the New Jersey Supreme Court had already ruled in a unanimous opinion that no one has a right to die. Judge Muir's decision was a foregone conclusion. His decision was but a procedural prologue to a re-examination of this fundamental question by the New Jersey's appeals court, and perhaps ultimately the federal courts as well. It is this issue which will be debated in the months and perhaps years to come. There was a time not too long ago when man could do but little when afflicted by serious illness, and found himself powerless before the ravages of nature. Man could proclaim with resignation, "The Lord hath given, the Lord hath taken." Let the name of the Lord be blessed. In our day, many feel that scientists and physicians have succeeded in prolonging life through the application of human intellect and technology. It is therefore fitting and proper that members of the scientific community, to the arbiters of whether the quality of such life is worth preserving. The argument acquires a measure of cogency when the decision to terminate life is reached for a purportedly higher purpose, such as transplantation of an organ for a purportedly higher purpose. an organ from a moribund individual to a patient with greater chances for recovery. The new dictum appears to be science hath given, science hath taken, but let the cause of science be blessed. That same argument is also heard in instances in which there is simply scant hope that the patient will recover. Man, it is argued, should not become the victim of his own technology. Man should not be forced to cling to life simply because he has the technical ability to do so. Nature should be permitted to take its course. Man is instinctively repulsed by the prospect of becoming the agent for the death of his fellow. The repugnance is keenly felt regardless of the patient's condition, and whether the contemplated act of euthanasia is active or passive. The reconciliation of termination of the life of a fellow human being with one's instinctive moral feelings is indeed a formidable challenge. The widespread press coverage of the Quinlan case highlighted a most curious aspect of the contemporary thought processes. Now that a decision has been handed down and the case is being appealed before the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey, every informed person recognizes that the issue is being adjudicated is that the refusal of treatment, that is, does a person or his proxy have a right to demand that he be permitted to die, or does the state have an overriding, compelling interest in the preservation of the life of each of its citizens? Yet the case first received publicity in the media. It was presented in an entirely different guise. It was then presented as a definition of death case. We were urged both on editorial pages and in what passed for a straightforward news report to accept brain death as a scientifically precise criterion of cessation of life. This tactic was abandoned only when it became patently obvious that Karen Quinlan must be considered to be alive, even if the newly advocated definition of death were to be accepted. Why the confusion? Psychologically, it is not all difficult to understand what has transpired. No one really wants to sanction murder. Homicide is aberrant. Man is endowed with a moral consciousness of which recoils with shock at the very idea of taking the life of a fellow human being. No one wants to let another human being die. Man has deeply ingrained sense of responsibility for his fellow. Man does perceive himself as his brother's keeper. Confronted with the tremendous emotional and financial toll exacted by the protracted care of a comatose patient, man finds himself impaled upon the horns of a dilemma. Moral sanction for abandoning the patient eludes him, yet the burden of sustaining life seems intolerable. The resolution of the problem is to pass between the horns of the dilemma by means of lexicographical sleight of hand. If the patient may somehow be pronounced dead, the problem is dispelled. Treatment may then be suspended without doing violence to ethical sensitivities. This exercise in semantics can be and has been extended to resolve other bioethical problems. If one wishes to avoid the moral onus of snuffing out a human life, when performing an abortion. It is logically imperative that the fetus be denied status as a person. The transition from one position to the next is clearly delineated in a letter to the editor, which appeared in the New York Times on March 6, 1972. Author of Cyril Means, Jr., professor of constitutional law at New York Law School, writes, "An adult heart donor suffering from an irreversible brain damage is also a living human being, but he is no longer a human person. That is why his life may be ended by the excision of his heart for the benefit of another. The done, who is still a human person. If there can be human beings who are non-persons at one end of a lifespan, why not the other end? Once one moral concept is abrogated by the process of redefinition, does any norm remain sacrosanct?" Another case in a point is the problem of defective newborns. Babies born with severe congenital abnormalities or suffering from serious mental retardation are bound to be a burden to their parents, their siblings, and society. What can be done? Killing them is unthinkable. Abandoning the baby to custodial care in public institutions merely shifts the financial burden from parents to society at large and carries in its wake feelings of guilt to boot. Moreover, the extensive care and treatment which such infants require does create a genuine strain upon already limited and inadequate health care resources. Resolution: let us redefine birth. Birth shall no longer be regarded as taking place at the moment of parturition, but as occurring 72 hours after the emergence of the infant from the birth canal. Since the baby is not yet born, in the event that it is found to be physically or mentally defective, it could be destroyed with impunity up to the moment of birth. This proposal was made in an earnest by the Dr. James Watson, co-discoverer of the double helix in DNA. Situation ethicist Joseph Fletcher counsels that such infants should not be considered human children, but should rather be viewed as reproductive failures. And so the game continues. Quite apart from the theological considerations, definitions of death which, in reality, are value judgments, in disguise are fraught with danger. Who is to decide at which stage of physical or mental deterioration life is no longer worthwhile? It is but a short step from the notion of brain death to the formulation of a definition of death, centering around social death. That is, an individual's capacity to serve as a useful member of society. It is entirely conceivable that eventually the concept of death will be broadened to include a person who consumes more of society's resources than he produces. Such a person is not productive, and from a societal perspective, his life appears to be hardly worth preserving. Fears such as these should not be dismissed as absurd. England's eminent biologist and Nobel Prize laureate, Dr. Francis Crick, has already advanced beyond this point in advocating compulsory death for all at the age of 80 as part of a new ethical system based on modern science. Human civilization has in the past witnessed attempts to make the right to life subservient to other values. Exposure of the age to the elements of practiced by primitive societies, infanticide was not at all uncommon in the 18th century England. The Nazis broadened their infamous final solution to encompass the mentally ill and feeble-minded. Each policy was undertaken in the name of enhancing the equality and dignity of human life. This is a road which men have trodden in the past. The achievement was never dignity, but ignominy. It is quite true that man has the power to prolong life, far beyond the point at which it ceases to be either productive or pleasurable. Not infrequently, the patient, if capable of expressing his desires and allowed to follow his own inclinations, would opt for termination of life, which has become a burden both to others and to himself. Judaism, however, teaches that man does not enjoy the right of self-determination with regard to questions of life and death. Generations ago, our sages wrote, "Against your will you live, against your will you die." While conventionally understood as underscoring the irony that a baby's wishes to be born no more than an adult wishes to die, these words today take on a new meaning. They may be taken quite literally as an eloquent summary of the Jewish view with regard to both euthanasia and the withholding of life-sustaining treatment. Judaism has always taught that life, no less than death, is involuntary. Only the Creator, who bestows the gift of life, may relieve man of that life, even when it has become a burden rather than a blessing. Choose life toward a culture of life in the new millennium. By Most Reverend Charles J. Chaput. Therefore, choose life, that you and your descendants may live. Danny's story. Americans could sell sand in the desert. We're the world's best marketers. That's the genius, and also the weakness of our talent as people. We use words with great skill, but without thinking too deeply about their consequences. In fact, we often use them precisely to prevent ourselves from thinking too deeply. We now avidly market everything from tobacco to assisted suicide, using words like candy to entice approval, or like heavy artillery to drive critics back into their trenches. Words can sell anything. They can also justify anything. The result, unfortunately, is that fewer and fewer of us have confidence in the honesty of our public debates. We're becoming a nation of skeptics, 25 years after Roe v. Wade. This means that any reflection on the culture of life begins from a deficit. The language of idealism has been so strangely misused for so long that many citizens simply don't listen anymore to appeals to principle or conscience. About the only thing which remains irrefutable is experience. So let me begin with the story of a colleague. Billy stands alone on a cold pebble beach in the silence of a gathering twilight. A small boat approaches. A young man eases it through the water with an oar. Bill knows this man. It's his son, Dan. Dan is in his mid-20s. His round, bright eyes are alive, with humor as he holds out a hand. The strong, muscled hand of an athlete, to help his old man into the boat. "Let's go, Pop," he says as they cast off toward an unseen shore. Or anyway, that's what probably happens, because Bill always wakes up before he gets into the boat. The dream first came the night he learned that Dan had Down syndrome. Dan's eyes will never be round, and he'll never be an athlete, at least not like his older brothers. Bill knows that dreams like this are his sign of anxiety, which is why he hasn't had one in many months. With Dan 7 years old now, so much of who Dan is and what he needs and does has become routine. Bill and his wife still worry about Dan's future, but the panic and sense of failure. It's curious, Bill says, how these feelings gradually pass. What's striking about Dan, according to Bill, is not how different he is from others, but how similar. Yes, he fits all the usual Down syndrome cliches employed to smooth the hard edge of a birth defect, a sweet temper, a gentle smile. He is also trouble on wheels, like every other first grader. Dan is a person. He merely wears his imperfections on the outside, where they remind us uncomfortably of our own. And that is a problem with Dan and all who have mental and physical disabilities. They are too obvious. They embarrass us. We flee the imperfect behind a smokescreen of new programs, reformed vocabulary, and ersatz sympathy, while politely arranging their prevention or their destruction with Orwellian understatements like genetic counseling. Bill doesn't have his dream anymore, but he thinks about it sometimes. Dan healed, Dan perfected. What would that even mean? That he longs for a child other than the one he has? Better, 3 Dannies, 5 Dannies, 100 Dannies, then 1 Danny fixed according to my confusion and unforgiving specs. You see, the thirst for perfection in our children, in our friends, in the strangers we encounter, is really a thirst for perfection within our wounded selves. The irony of God's design is that only our weakness, our imperfection, can drive the economy of love. It's what makes us human. We need each other. In all of Dan's limitations and in all his possibilities, Bill has learned that his son is a treasure and not a mistake. God does not make mistakes. Words and their consequences. I relate Danny's story because today we need to begin with the specific and concrete in order to arrive at the general principles, which we all instinctively shared. It is one thing to muffle the abortion issue as an abstraction, with the heavy snowfall of pro-choice marketing rhetoric. It's quite another to try that with real 7-year-old who talks back. However clumsily, abortion kills people like Danny. In fact, Down syndrome children are becoming extinct because of the defense or reproductive choice in the pursuit of human perfection have been elevated to modern dogma. Some observers criticize that using the graphic fetal images to show the brutality of abortion techniques. It's true that sometimes the use of such images are inappropriate, for example, when small children might see them and be traumatized, but undeniably, these pictures of broken bodies reconnect the hot air balloon of political debate to the gravity of the consequences, which involves flesh and blood. Pictures show what pro-choice rhetoric tries to hide. Terminating a pregnancy means killing a child prior to birth. Partial birth abortion means stabbing and collapsing the skull of an infant who is partially born. Our society markets this as a choice, and as a result, people are duped. Society is soothed into indifference. For a young man who hadn't planned on making a lifetime commitment, the choice of having his girlfriend abort is better than the choice of paying 18 years of child support. Parents of a pregnant teen may think that they only have 2 choices: ending a pregnancy to maintain their daughter's reputation, schooling and her chance for a good career and marriage, or helping her raise her child or arrange an adoption. They might not consider their grandchild's right to live, right to life. When it's just a matter of choice, social and economic concerns can easily trump any claim that a potential baby might have. And so we continue to kill, thinking it is somehow acceptable because we call it by another name. Today's marketing of physician-assisted suicide is perhaps even more ominous because we have even less reason to be naive about it. Anyone who has read Michael Burleigh's profoundly troubling Death and Deliverance, Euthanasia in Germany, 1900 to 1945, will see that too many of us have learned too little from the bitter experience of this century. While the Nazis perfected the process of murdering those who were defective, weak, and disabled, the German medical establishment inclination toward euthanasia predated the Nazis and can be traced to the eugenics movement of the early part of this century. The same eugenics movements persist today. In this country, albeit with the larger vocabulary and pedigree and better public relations advisors. Nor can we plead innocence due to ignorance. We've had too many warnings. Society may start, as Oregon has, by allowing physician-assisted suicide in limited circumstances. But it can only end as a social necessity. As Paul Wilkes and others have noted, some Dutch doctors today, right now, have already gone beyond helping patients die to actively killing them without their consent, because the physicians considered them better off dead. In the Netherlands, safeguards against the abuse of physician-assisted suicide were trumpeted as stringent, but the safeguards don't work because the logic of physician-assisted suicides is naturally relentlessly expand. Remember history. As Berlow records, the Nazi euthanasia campaign began on the merciful-sounding pretext of relieving people of unbearable pain. It ended with killing mentally and physically disabled the infirm, the insane, the antisocial. The merely troublesome, and of course 6 million Jews. It is perhaps most disturbing of all that those who carried out the killing were often normal citizens who in many cases found the habit of therapeutic killing remarkably easy to acquire. The hidden costs. The human costs of abortion are catastrophically high for all of us because abortion connects and intertwines with other behaviors which determine our cultural character. Let me explain. Here in Colorado, we take great pride in the beauty of our natural environment. Each fall, thousands of us make a trek into the Rocky Mountains to watch the aspen trees turn a spectacular gold. But the color of autumn isn't the only unusual quality to the aspens. These trees are unique because each